Let's be clear from the start. Pure goodness by itself can be dangerous in this world. If you think that simply being a good person is enough to thrive, you're living in a fantasy. And the worst part? Deep down, you already know this truth, even though you might refuse to accept it. How many times have you bent over backwards to help others, only to be taken for granted? How many times have you sacrificed your own needs, only to be left empty and depleted? How many times have you chosen kindness, only to watch others capitalize on your good nature? We've all been taught that goodness is its own reward, that compassion and empathy are the highest virtues, that selflessness is the path to a meaningful life. But these teachings often hide a darker truth. Unchecked goodness can destroy you. And this is where Arthur Schopenhauer comes in. Schopenhauer understood something that most people ignore. Human existence is fundamentally driven by suffering. In his masterwork, The World as Will and Representation, he made it clear that our constant desires create endless dissatisfaction. He saw that blind compassion without boundaries is not a strength, but a weakness, that goodness without discernment is a trap. And now tell me, how many times have you fallen into that trap? Think about those you admire, those who have achieved balance and respect in their lives. Do you think they got there by giving endlessly without boundaries? Number. They got there because they understood when compassion serves and when it harms, when goodness uplifts and when it enables destruction. They recognize that morality without wisdom becomes self-destruction. The problem isn't that you're compassionate. The problem is that you don't know how to protect your compassion from being exploited. You believe that everyone values goodness as much as you do, but that's not the case. The world is full of people who see kindness as weakness, who recognize selflessness as an opportunity, who can spot a people-pleaser from miles away. And you, without realizing it, have been the perfect target. This is where Schopenhauer offers an alternative view: informed compassion. It's not about becoming cold or cynical. It's not about abandoning your moral principles. It's about understanding that goodness must be guided by a deep recognition of reality. It's about learning to read people's true motivations, to anticipate the consequences of your giving, to know when compassion truly helps and when it merely enables. Schopenhauer argued that the world is fundamentally driven by what he called will, a blind, insatiable striving force behind all existence. This will manifests in humans as endless desire and creates perpetual suffering. According to him, life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom. Pleasure is merely the temporary absence of pain, not a positive state in itself. What does this mean for your goodness? It means recognizing that much of human behavior is driven not by rational thought but by unconscious wants. When you offer endless kindness without discernment, you're not addressing reality but living in a moral fantasy. How many times have you exhausted yourself trying to fill others' bottomless needs? How many times have you said yes when every part of you was screaming no? How many times have you suffered from compassion fatigue, burning out, because you couldn't establish healthy boundaries? It's not about being cold. It's about being realistic. The key is knowing when to give, when to withhold, when to offer support, and when to demand accountability. Your compassion is valuable, too valuable to waste on those who would abuse it, or situations where it causes more harm than good. Schopenhauer would tell you that truly understanding suffering means recognizing when your help actually perpetuates it. He would say that naive goodness often becomes complicit in the very problems it tries to solve. Think about it. How much longer will you let your goodness be weaponized against you? How much longer will you be a victim of your own compassion? I'm not telling you to stop being good. I'm telling you to start being good in a way that honors your own existence. Learn to recognize the difference between genuine need and manipulation. Know when your helping is healing and when it's enabling. Understand when your kindness uplifts and when it creates unhealthy dependency. Because Schopenhauer didn't write to teach you to be selfish. He wrote to teach you how to face reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. And here comes a concept that very few truly understand: the paradox of suffering. Schopenhauer recognized that much of human life is characterized by pain. Life is a constant process of dying, he wrote. But his insights weren't meant to depress us. They were meant to liberate us from false hopes that only increase our disappointment. Think about this. How many times have you seen someone trapped in a cycle of giving that never ends? How many times have you watched a person sacrifice everything for others, only to be left with nothing for themselves? How many times have you witnessed genuine compassion transformed into martyrdom? This is no accident. People don't appreciate what comes too easily. They don't value what's given without limits. They don't respect boundaries they've never been shown. Schopenhauer understood this aspect of human psychology all too well. In his view, our desires are insatiable. Give someone everything they want, and they'll simply want more. The desire to be good, to be liked, to be needed, can itself become a trap. Schopenhauer saw that much of what we consider selfless is actually driven by very selfish motives: the desire for approval, the avoidance of conflict, the need to be seen as virtuous. He wrote, "A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants." Our motives often remain hidden, even from ourselves. That's why the key isn't just in being good, but in understanding the true nature of your goodness. Is your compassion truly about helping others? Or is it about how being helpful makes you feel? Is your self-sacrifice genuinely necessary, or is it a way to feel morally superior? Is your inability to say no really about others' needs, or is it about your fear of disapproval? True virtue, according to Schopenhauer, comes not from moral rules or social approval, but from genuine recognition of another's suffering as your own. But this recognition becomes distorted when you lose yourself in it. As he put it, compassion is the basis of morality, but compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Think about this. In any act of giving, there's a giver and a receiver. When the giver is constantly depleted, the relationship becomes unbalanced, unhealthy, unsustainable. Are you creating balance in your compassion, or are you perpetuating imbalance? If you're good, but have no boundaries, people will treat you as if you have no value. If you're compassionate but cannot say no, they will make endless demands. If you're empathetic but have no self-protection, you will absorb all the world's pain until you collapse. It's that simple. The art of balanced compassion is what separates those who maintain their goodness from those who burn out. And here we enter a deeper area of Schopenhauer's thought: the recognition of universal suffering. Have you ever wondered why truly wise, compassionate people seem to have a certain detachment? Why do those who help effectively always maintain a certain distance? The answer is simple. They understand that suffering is universal and endless. Schopenhauer taught that the world's pain cannot be fixed by any single person. As he famously wrote, "The two enemies of human happiness are pain and boredom." We cannot eliminate either permanently. People caught in naive morality believe that enough sacrifice, enough giving, enough compassion will somehow fix the fundamental brokenness of existence. But Schopenhauer saw this as profound delusion. No amount of goodness can eliminate the will that drives all suffering. Learn to see your limits, not as moral failures, but as natural boundaries. Learn to recognize that saying no isn't selfish but necessary. Learn to understand that preserving your own well-being isn't opposed to compassion. It's essential for sustainable compassion. Think of someone you admire for their genuine goodness, someone with real impact on others' lives. Are they someone who gives indiscriminately until they're empty? Or someone who gives meaningfully, strategically, with clear boundaries and self-respect? The problem with many good people is that they confuse boundaries with selfishness. They believe that if they don't give everything, they are giving nothing. But it's not about giving less. It's about giving better. It's about making your goodness effective rather than performative. Think about this. How many times have you given until you had nothing left? How many times have you helped someone only to realize you were enabling destructive behavior? How many times have you offered compassion that actually prevented necessary growth? True wisdom in giving isn't in how much you give, but in how you give it. Power isn't in endless sacrifice. Power is in knowing when your compassion helps and when it harms. And here comes the big lesson that Schopenhauer understood deeply. The one who helps indiscriminately, the one who gives without boundaries, the one who cannot say no, is not actually practicing true compassion. Why? Because genuine compassion requires wisdom. It requires understanding that sometimes helping hurts. It requires recognizing that enabling isn't loving. It demands acknowledging that proper boundaries actually make your goodness more valuable, not less. Schopenhauer wrote, "Compassion is the basis of all morality," but he didn't mean sentimental emotionalism that ignores reality. He meant a clear-eyed recognition of suffering that responds appropriately, not blindly. And here comes another fundamental concept from Schopenhauer's philosophy: the role of aesthetic contemplation. In the midst of a world driven by insatiable desire and inevitable suffering, Schopenhauer found that art and beauty offer temporary freedom from the will's demands. When we lose ourselves in music, painting, literature, or nature, we momentarily escape the driving force of desire. For that brief time, we become pure, will-less, painless, timeless subject of knowledge. This is one of the few respites available from the relentless demands of existence. What does this mean for your goodness? It means recognizing that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do, both for yourself and others, is to step back, to find perspective, to reconnect with something larger than immediate problems. Constant reactive helping without reflection often misses the deeper patterns that perpetuate suffering. Think about this. How often do your attempts to fix others' problems become a cycle with no end? How often does your helping create dependency rather than growth? How often does your goodness keep both you and others trapped in destructive patterns? Schopenhauer would suggest that periodically stepping away from the immediate urge to help allows for a clearer perspective. True compassion sometimes requires seeing the bigger picture that constant involvement prevents you from noticing. Predictable helpers are easy to manipulate. If you always respond the same way, if your goodness follows a formula, if your compassion lacks discernment, others will learn exactly how to use your virtues against you. But when your responses come from wisdom rather than habit, when people can't predict exactly how you'll react, when your compassion is guided by insight rather than automatic reaction, you become someone whose goodness has real power. Schopenhauer understood this better than most. A person whose responses are mechanical, whose goodness lacks boundaries, whose compassion is blind rather than insightful, becomes a tool rather than an agent. But a person who maintains independence of thought, who helps from choice rather than compulsion, who gives from strength rather than fear, that is someone whose goodness changes lives rather than enabling dysfunction. And now the question is, do you want to keep being drained by unexamined goodness, manipulated through your compassion, defined by endless giving? Or do you want to start being a conscious moral agent, someone who brings discernment to their kindness, wisdom to their empathy, and boundaries to their giving? Because goodness without wisdom is just another form of unconsciousness. The world doesn't change its fundamental nature for you, so learn to practice compassion with your eyes open to what really exists, not what you've been conditioned to believe. And if you apply what truly works, if you align your compassion with reality rather than fantasy, then for the first time, you will stop being a victim of your own virtues and start being someone whose goodness actually transforms rather than enables. But here comes the most interesting part of Schopenhauer's philosophy: his understanding of asceticism and denial of the will. For Schopenhauer, the highest ethical achievement wasn't just setting boundaries on compassion, but actually transcending the will to live altogether. In his view, the saints and ascetics of various traditions achieved something profound. They recognized the futility of desire itself and withdrew from its demands. He wrote, "A happy life is impossible. The highest that man can attain is a heroic life." By this he meant a life where one faces the truth of existence without illusion and responds with appropriate resignation. Many believe that the key to meaningful compassion is to constantly engage, to always be available, to never withdraw from others' needs. But Schopenhauer suggests something different, that true understanding sometimes requires strategic distance, careful disengagement, contemplative withdrawal. Think about this. Why do certain spiritual traditions emphasize periods of solitude, silence, and retreat? Why do many of history's most compassionate figures also maintain practices of withdrawal and contemplation? The difference lies in understanding that constant activity, even compassionate activity, can become another form of unconsciousness. Schopenhauer said, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." Many people's goodness lacks depth precisely because it lacks reflection. Their compassion becomes mechanical, reactive, ultimately superficial because it never pauses to question its own foundations. When you're always responding, always giving, always trying to fix others' problems, you can become blind to the patterns that create those problems in the first place. You become part of a system rather than someone who can transform it. Your goodness becomes a bandage rather than a cure. Think about it. How many times have your immediate acts of helpfulness actually prevented a deeper, more difficult, but ultimately more transformative response? How many times has your quick compassion actually short-circuited necessary growth? It's no accident. It's human nature to choose the immediate relief over the challenging transformation. Those who truly have an impact are not those who are endlessly available, but those who show up with presence and wisdom when it matters. The real players are not exhausted by constant giving, but refreshed by strategic withdrawal and thoughtful re-engagement. And this brings us to another key point in Schopenhauer's thinking: emotional clarity as the foundation of true ethics. Here is where most good people fail. Many believe that compassion is based primarily on emotional response, on feeling others' pain, on immersing oneself in empathic connection. But true compassion, the kind Schopenhauer pointed toward despite his pessimism, is based on seeing clearly rather than feeling overwhelmingly. Because the one who is carried away by emotional reaction, the one who cannot maintain perspective, the one who becomes lost in others' suffering, becomes ineffective and eventually breaks down. Think about the last time someone's pain completely overwhelmed you. The moment you lost all perspective, the moment you could no longer distinguish between their suffering and your response to it. Who was truly helped in that situation? It wasn't them, and it certainly wasn't you. Because the one who loses emotional clarity, the one who cannot maintain boundaries between self and other, the one who becomes engulfed by empathy rather than informed by it, that person ultimately cannot sustain their compassion. They burn out, withdraw, or become resentful. The key isn't feeling less, it's seeing more clearly. It's not about reducing your compassion, but about grounding it in wisdom rather than reaction. It's about responding from choice rather than compulsion, from insight rather than habit. Schopenhauer distinguished between what he called empirical character, our automatic, will-driven responses to life, and acquired character, which comes from reflection and self-knowledge. Most people's goodness never evolves beyond the empirical character stage. It remains reactive, unconscious, ultimately driven by forces they don't recognize or understand. Here's the truth. Those who truly make a difference are not those who feel others' pain most intensely, but those who respond to it most wisely. They are not the most emotionally reactive, but the most consistently present. They don't lose themselves in others' suffering. They stand firmly rooted in awareness while extending genuine help. And this leads us to the final key point that Schopenhauer's philosophy illuminates: the power of patient wisdom. Most people want immediate results from their goodness. They want to see instant gratitude, immediate change, quick resolution to suffering. But what Schopenhauer taught through his pessimistic lens is that true understanding accepts the slow, difficult nature of genuine transformation. The world is full of reactive helpers who jump to fix, rescue, and solve without understanding the deeper patterns at play. But those who truly transform suffering know how to wait, how to observe, how to respond at the right moment rather than the first moment. Think of a skilled physician. They don't treat symptoms without understanding causes. They don't rush intervention without proper diagnosis. They know that sometimes waiting and observing reveals more than immediate action could accomplish. This is the wisdom of mature compassion. It's not about rushing in at the first sign of pain. It's about discerning what response truly serves in the long term. As Schopenhauer observed, haste is universal because everyone is in flight from himself. Often, our quick helping is more about escaping our own discomfort with others' suffering than truly addressing their needs. Mediocre helpers react from habit. Wise helpers respond from insight. And now I ask you, are you someone who rushes to help without seeing the whole picture, or someone who brings patience and discernment to your compassion? Because in this world, the deepest impact doesn't come from those who help most immediately, but from those who help most appropriately. True compassion belongs to those who understand the nature of suffering, who recognize that quick fixes often become long-term problems, who know that sometimes growth requires pain that helping too quickly would prevent. And if you apply all of this, if you bring boundaries to your compassion, wisdom to your giving, patience to your helping, you will stop being depleted by your goodness and start being empowered by it. The world will remain filled with suffering, but now you'll know how to respond in ways that truly serve rather than merely seem virtuous. But here comes what truly makes the difference between those who merely practice conventional goodness and those who achieve a higher understanding: the willingness to question moral assumptions that everyone else takes for granted. Because now you know, now you understand, that blind compassion isn't enough, that goodness without boundaries becomes self-destruction, that empathy without wisdom drains rather than fulfills, that helping without discernment often enables rather than empowers. But what good is all this understanding if you keep acting from the same unexamined moral reflexes as before? If you want different results from your compassion, you must become someone who doesn't conform to traditional assumptions about what it means to be good. The problem with most compassionate people is that they think within the moral framework that has been handed to them. They follow the same patterns of helping that they've observed or been taught. They respond as expected, giving in ways that are socially approved, but often practically ineffective. But those who truly make a difference, those who practice what Schopenhauer might call enlightened compassion, are those who dare to help differently, to give counterintuitively, to set boundaries that others might initially misunderstand. They recognize that true compassion sometimes looks like stepping back rather than jumping in, saying no rather than yes, allowing natural consequences rather than shielding others from the results of their choices. And here's the secret that Schopenhauer's philosophy reveals: the world is designed to take advantage of conventional goodness. If you practice compassion the same way as everyone else, you'll get the same results as everyone else. Burnout, resentment, ineffectiveness. The only way to truly serve is to step outside conventional moral assumptions and respond from deeper wisdom. Be the one who helps differently. Be the one who gives strategically rather than automatically. Be the one who brings discernment to situations where others bring only reflexive sympathy. Be the one who speaks necessary truths when others offer only comforting illusions. When you learn this approach to goodness, something shifts within you. You realize that you were never failing at compassion. You were simply practicing it without wisdom. You realize that others haven't been taking advantage of you because you're too good, but because your goodness lacked boundaries and discernment. But now you know. And knowing this changes everything, because the moment you apply these insights, the moment you start bringing wisdom to your compassion, boundaries to your giving, discernment to your helping, you'll notice how differently the world responds to you. The people who used to drain you will begin to respect your limits. Those who used to take you for granted will start to value what you offer. Those who used to manipulate your goodness will recognize that your compassion now comes with conditions. Not selfish conditions, but the condition of genuine mutual growth. Because what separates those whose goodness depletes them from those whose goodness empowers them is not less compassion, but wiser compassion. It's not reduced giving, but more discerning giving. It's not hardened hearts, but clearer boundaries. The choice is yours. You can stay with this information as an interesting philosophical idea, or you can begin implementing a new approach to your compassion. You can continue with the same patterns of helping that have led to your depletion, or you can bring Schopenhauer's insights to your goodness. But I warn you of something. If you return to conventional, unexamined goodness, you'll do so with the awareness that you're choosing your own exhaustion. You're choosing to be used rather than truly useful, or you can start changing now. Small shifts, small experiments. Pause before automatically saying yes. Consider whether your help truly serves or merely enables. Reflect on whether your empathy is creating dependency or fostering growth. Set a boundary where you previously would have allowed overstepping. Small actions that, over time, transform not just how others see your goodness, but how you practice it. Small actions that, when you least expect it, will have transformed you from someone whose compassion is exploited into someone whose compassion creates genuine change. Because the world doesn't remember those who helped mindlessly. It remembers those who helped meaningfully. And now tell me, are you ready to practice compassion with wisdom? Are you prepared to bring Schopenhauer's insights to your goodness? If you've made it this far, I want to know who really understood the message. Leave the phrase "compassion with boundaries" in the comments, and let's see how many of you have grasped what it truly means to practice discerning goodness. And if this video made you question your assumptions about compassion, if it made you see your own goodness from a different angle, subscribe, because this is just the beginning. See you in the next video, and remember, don't be another depleted helper. Be the one who transforms suffering through wisdom.